This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido took to the streets with activists and a small group of heavily armed soldiers today. He's calling for the military to rise up and overthrow socialist leader Nicolas Maduro. Charlene Aaron is in the newsroom with the latest. Charlene?
That's right, Wendy. Tensions and unrest are escalating in Venezuela after opposition leader Juan Guaido called for an uprising. Tear gas canisters were fired into a crowd outside of Caracas Air Force Base in response to Guaido's call to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro. Thousands took to the streets for what's being called the final phase in a mission to oust Maduro. Troops loyal to Maduro fired a mix of pellets and live ammo at people as Maduro attempts to repress the uprising. Armored vehicles also driven into protesters. Guaido saying today it's been years of sacrifice, persecution, and even years of fear. He said today that fear ends. The country's ongoing political struggle has caused tremendous humanitarian and economic suffering to the Venezuelan people. Maduro has prevented humanitarian aid from entering the country.
We don't have the materials to work in the hospitals.
Maduro denies responsibility for the suffering in his country. Guaido has been recognized by the U.S. and more than 50 other nations. Today, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted, "The U.S. government fully supports the Venezuelan people in their quest for freedom and democracy. Democracy cannot be defeated." And meanwhile, the White House says President Trump has been briefed and is monitoring the situation. Wendy, back to you.
Thanks so much, Charlene. CBN News international reporter George Thomas, George Thomas is with us now on the set. George, Guaido says this is the beginning of the end. What do you make about this his latest effort to oust Maduro?
Well, listen, it really, Wendy, I've been saying this for the months that we have been covering it here at CBN News. The linchpin in all of this is not Juan Guaido, is not Nicolas Maduro. It is the men who don military fatigues. It's always been about the military. Where is the military's alliance? And today, this morning, you see Juan Guaido went early morning. We had a whole bunch of soldiers behind him saying that this was the time that the military rallies around him. But look, the Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino went on air within a few hours, basically saying that the men that surrounded Juan Guaido are minuscule. They don't have the sort of large numbers of people. Venezuela's socialist president Nicolas Maduro took to Twitter and he said the following: "Nerves of steel. I have spoken to all commanders all around the country who have pledged their total loyalty to the people, the Constitution, and the fatherland. I call for maximum popular mobilization to assure the victory of peace. We will win." This is the reality. Sure, this was a dramatic moment and made even more dramatic, Wendy, when the activist by the name of Leopoldo Lopez. Why is this important? Leopoldo Lopez was detained by the Maduro government back in 2014. He is the main opposition figure against Nicolas Maduro. Suddenly, this morning, he joined the scene with Juan Guaido. How did he come out of house arrest? The reports that we're getting right now is that members of the armed forces, they went and they were able to get him out of house arrest, and he joined Juan Guaido. He is such a popular individual. Everybody knows him. And so when they saw Mr. Lopez on the streets of Caracas, it was a dramatic moment. Now, whether this is going to lead to an actual removal of the government is very, very, I'm not sure. I mean, we've seen the dramatic images today, but look, it's all about the military. Who controls the military, and the allegiance is key.
Interesting. George, thank you for your insight. We have CBN contributing reporter Chuck Holton. He was just in Colombia and joins us now by Skype. Chuck, tell us, how are things looking there today?
Well, it is absolutely jubilant from the people that I talked to, the people that were on my plane, the Venezuelans, as we were leaving Cucuta early this morning. they all got the news at the same time that this had happened, and they were just cheering on the airplane. But I can tell you that yesterday and over the last couple of days on the border town of Cucuta, I've been meeting with members of the Venezuelan military who defected back on January 23rd when the aid got burned there. And what they were telling me is that this is something that has been planned for some time. Now, they believe it may have gone off a little bit half-cocked, but they told me that the military of Venezuela has been behind Guaido in large part. The vast majority of them have been behind Guaido, but they've been waiting for the right moment to strike because Maduro has been maintaining power through fear and intimidation. These troops have families, and if they stand up to Maduro, they and their families are at great peril. And so these soldiers that have been outside of Venezuela in Colombia for some time have been communicating secretly with their compadres in the military forces, and they're telling me that this is a widespread movement. This is not just in Caracas. We just got news that the military has detained the general in charge of all military industry in a town called Maracay, which is quite far from Caracas. They've arrested that guy, and there are other uprisings around the country right now.
Chuck, do you think this is going to get violent? Is it going to get ugly before it gets better?
Oh, it already is getting violent. There's no doubt about it. There was a lot of gunfire in the streets of Caracas this morning. Twitter was exploding with amateur video of people showing the gunfire and the fighting between pro-Guaido forces. And it was not other military forces so much as it was the colectivos, those biker gangs, many of them just criminals that Maduro has armed and allowed to basically keep order. Now, we did see some instances where the military was against itself, where they had military troops bearing down with their weapons on other military troops and proning them out on the ground, arresting them and detaining them. We also saw some military vehicles that were running down protesters. So there is violence happening already. And what we're seeing is I'm afraid the beginning. It's going to have to get bloody before this thing is over.
Chuck, we appreciate your insights. We're glad to see you safe, and we really appreciate that report. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, Sri Lankan officials warn the suicide attacks may not be over. More than 250 people were killed in the Easter Sunday bombings. ISIS claims responsibility, but investigators say they're not yet sure the extent of the terror group's role. Meanwhile, Monday was the first public mass since Catholic leaders closed down their churches out of fear. Hundreds of troops armed with assault rifles monitored the service. Well, authorities have arrested a 26-year-old U.S. Army veteran accusing him of planning terror attacks in California. Mark Stephen Domingo served in Afghanistan. He's suspected of plotting to detonate a bomb at a Long Beach rally over the weekend. Federal prosecutors say Domingo converted to Islam and wanted revenge for the New Zealand mosque attacks. Investigators say he discussed his deadly plans with undercover agents that he met online.
The terror plot culminated with plans to bomb innocent people, causing dozens of deaths and serious injuries.
Meanwhile, in the deadly shooting at a Southern California synagogue, residents mourn the loss of 60-year-old Lori Gilbert Kay. Friends say she stepped in front of the rabbi to stop the accused gunman, 19-year-old John Ernest. The FBI says it received a tip about a threatening social media post about 5 minutes before the attack on the synagogue. People of all religions came together in honor of the deadly synagogue shooting. The vigil was held last night in Poway, California. Jewish leaders joined leaders of other faiths to condemn hate and call for faith and unity.
On Saturday, a piercing sadness and suffering echoed forth in our land, and this time not far away, but here in our own county of San Diego. And yet, a short time later, a much more powerful sound, a sound of resilience and strength and hope, a sign of faith in God, a sign of the willingness to find love even amidst the most trying and horrifying of circumstances.
A reminder to check out our CBN News Daily Rundown podcast with Caitlin Burke. She gives a behind-the-scenes look at a key story in the news every day. You can find it at cbnnews.com. On the show tab, click on its title to listen and subscribe. Coming up, with mass shootings not slowing down, we take a look at gun laws in the U.S. and what's new in the gun debate. And before we go to break, take a look at what's trending today on cbnnews.com.
CBN presents The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
We're going to talk about some of the incredible promises God has made to His children.
In Pat Robertson's newest teaching, you'll discover the I Wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation, and see amazing stories of God's promises in action.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Break free from stress and despair.
The Lord doesn't want you to live in fear, but to know the rewards given to those who love God.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit cbn.com. The I Wills of God, your path to overcoming fear and anxiety.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Well, the debate over gun laws is one that hits close to home for many. And with the recent shootings in schools and places of worship, a lot of activists think our country needs stricter requirements in place for gun owners. Gun violence leaves many worried parents, teachers, pastors, and citizens wondering what is the best solution. And joining us now is the Executive Director for Gun Owners of America, Eric Pratt. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Wendy, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, we want to find out what are some of the gun restriction laws being proposed right now or going through lawmakers' hands that you know of?
Well, they're talking about criminalizing private sales, all private sales. They're talking about imposing red flag gun confiscation orders, which has already led to the death of an innocent man in Maryland, where Maryland has that law. And they're also talking about banning commonly owned firearms. And this is typically something that certainly on the left, on the Democrat left, is universal support for those proposals.
Well, in the last 6 months alone, there have been 2 tragic shootings at houses of worship with the synagogue in California just recently, and then last year in Pittsburgh. How do gun laws in those 2 states compare to one another, California and Pennsylvania? And does that affect why shootings happen there?
Well, typically what you find is that in 98% of the public mass shootings in this country, they occur in gun-free zones. And that's the tremendous problem, is that it tells the bad guy, this is a place where you're going to be the only one with a firearm. California certainly leads the nation in terms of gun control, all kinds of restrictions, the restrictions that I already mentioned and many more, but even more importantly, they restrict concealed carry to those who can show good cause. And so there are many people who could potentially protect themselves that can't. You know, you opened up with a story on Venezuela, and that's really telling because Venezuela banned all guns in 2012, and then after that they confiscated firearms, and it didn't make their country any safer. Their murder rate skyrocketed to one of the highest in the world. And you know, now when you poll Venezuelans, they regret that decision because they see now a government that basically is waging war against anybody who's in opposition to them. That's really the importance of the Second Amendment. As the Supreme Court said, it's the ultimate way to resist tyranny, and we're seeing that front and center in Venezuela.
So we know the bad guys are not going to give up their guns. They're always going to find a way to get guns because they don't really care about the law. But would stricter gun laws, is there some form of a stricter gun law that could possibly help?
Well, certainly on the left, they think so. And yet, again, you look at California, which leads the nation in applying all the different variants of gun control, and it's not working. You know, take the recent synagogue shooting. California, they've already banned the commonly owned firearms, the so-called assault weapons, which really aren't assault weapons. They're not owned by any military on the earth. They're semi-automatic firearms. One pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out the barrel. They've imposed red flag gun confiscation orders. They've criminalized all private sales. You cannot sell a gun privately to your next door neighbor. They've upped the age to purchase a firearm. You have to be 21. So how did this 19-year-old get a firearm? Well, see, again, it comes back to bad guys are going to do bad things. They're going to get guns anyway. And all these efforts to restrict that is really only affecting the good people. And that's really the tragedy. You know, those restrictions on concealed carry is a travesty because that is ultimately, in fact, thankfully, there was a border agent there at the synagogue. In fact, the rabbi had asked him to be there. That's the way that you have to stop these things from occurring. In fact, FBI shooting reports indicate that when there is a mass shooting attempted and there is somebody there in the crowd with a firearm, in 94% of the cases, the mass shooting is stopped in its tracks or greatly mitigated. That's ultimately the way that you know, people need to be able to protect themselves before the police can get there and much carnage could happen.
Excellent point. We will have to end it there. This debate far from over, but we thank you so much for your insights. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Still ahead, a leading expert tells CBN News that despite failures and attempts to cure Alzheimer's, there's still hope for reversing the symptoms of people still in the early stages of the dreaded disease. We'll have that interview right after this.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
You know, I think as a father, it's my job, you know, to lead, just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Woohoo! Hi, Superbook fans. Here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh, no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
A Millsburg Falls man.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes, too. And so much more! Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon. It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
Discover the I wills of God. I will rescue him, protect him, answer him, be with him in trouble, deliver him, honor him, satisfy him with long life, show him my salvation.
What I felt was loved and treasured.
God spared my life twice in 3 days.
The good Lord had given me a second chance.
Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit CBN.com. The I Wills of God, the latest teaching from Pat Robertson.
Testing has stopped on what were once two promising Alzheimer's drugs because they simply didn't work. Meanwhile, the Journal of the American Medical Association warns against over-the-counter supplements claiming to cure Alzheimer's. But there's still hope. Studies show the Bredesen protocol can significantly reverse symptoms in people in the early stages of the disease. CBN's Lori Johnson spoke with Dr. Dale Bredesen on this week's Healthy Living program.
So there are hundreds, and we just actually published a paper showing 100 people who all have documented improvement where we have cognitive testing before, cognitive testing after, and some of these people also had quantitative EEGs that showed improvement. Others also had MRI volumetrics, so actually looking at volumes of their hippocampus and their brains, showing improvement. So it's been many at this point and a growing number.
Well, we know that your first research, which was published, dealt with 19 success stories. Recently, you published another paper that had 100 success stories, but you say thousands of people are on your protocol. Talk about some of them.
Right, and we don't have data on all of them because we've trained now over 1,500 physicians in 10 different countries and all over the U.S. So some of these people aren't telling us necessarily before and after on everyone. But we have, as you said, thousands of people on this. We have recently a person, for example, from overseas who went from a MoCA score of 3. And to give you an idea what that means, MoCA goes from 0 to 30. Normally, you would have scores typically 28, 29, 30, and it tests your memory and it tests your understanding of, naming animals, drawing a clock, things like that, repeating sentences, remembering things for several minutes, things like that. And this person scored a 3, which means very late stage. The average for all Alzheimer's patients is 16.2. So this person was very far, and actually she's now scoring at 20. So this is a huge change, and we see this. And of course, we don't see it in every single person. And that's one of the things we're trying to understand. Why do some people do so well and some people not do as well? We do know coming in earlier is better. Starting earlier is definitely better. But we're seeing improvements in speech, improvements in memory, improvements in engagement, interaction, all sorts of things.
And you say Sally, who is a wonderful success story, her score is also still very high and has been very high for a number of years.
Right. So she started out with a 24, which is MCI. So that's on the way to Alzheimer's, and very clearly had abnormalities, as well as had a PET scan that showed definitively that she had Alzheimer's disease. And her score is now perfect 30.
Wonderful. And, your Alzheimer's protocol is doing so well when at the same time we see that some of these Alzheimer's drugs are failing. Is there any other hope out there?
It's a good point. And of course, aducanumab was the big hope that we all had, and that just failed a few weeks ago. So there hasn't been anything. And part of the problem here is that what our research shows is that what is actually driving the phenomenon of Alzheimer's, which typically the doctors are not checking, unfortunately, is that there are many things from insulin resistance to leaky gut to systemic inflammation, for example, to toxin exposure. These all play a role, and for most people it's multiple. And of course, a drug only gets at one of these things. It doesn't get at all of them. So it's really important to look at the actual root causes of the problem. And then if you have several, you want to address all of those. So our hope is that in the future, the drugs, which I think are going to be very helpful ultimately, would be tested on the backbone of a program that addresses the actual cause. Because right now, of course, the doctor isn't giving you something that actually addresses the cause of your Alzheimer's.
And you're seeing people develop Alzheimer's at younger ages than ever before, right?
I have been so surprised to see that. When I was training, we were typically seeing people who were in their 70s and 80s. Now we are routinely seeing people who are in their 50s who are developing Alzheimer's. In fact, it's so surprising that often they'll think, well, this can't be Alzheimer's because I'm too young. We even see people in their 40s sometimes.
Wow, that's incredible. The Bredesen protocol tests people for the 36 causes of Alzheimer's, and depending on the results of that test, involves a tailor-made treatment. Usually that involves changes in diet, exercise, and reducing exposure to certain toxins. You can learn more about it on this week's edition of Healthy Living, starting at 9:30 Eastern Time tonight. That's on the CBN News Channel. After the break, why a wildfire in a UK forest is hitting people's hearts everywhere.
As the world watches from the outside,
it's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
It's what starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
Come home to the Southern Gospel Station from CBN Radio. You'll enjoy a rich Southern blend of bluegrass, classic gospel, and Southern gospel favorites. CBN Southern Gospel. Available now at cbnradio.com.
And finally, not much is left of the famed forest in the UK that inspired the children's series Winnie the Pooh. Firefighters were called late Sunday to the blaze in Ashdown Forest in southern England. The forest, known as the 100-acre wood in the books, helped set the scene for his stories about lovable bear Pooh and his friends. The fire burned 14 acres and was eventually brought under control Monday. 2 fires damaged the same forest in February. Hopefully they'll be able to rebuild. Well, replant rather. That's it for this edition of NewsWatch. You can find more on the issues you care about most at cbnnews.com. You can also watch CBN News programs anytime on our CBN News channel. We'd love to know more about what you think about our stories. Just email us at newswatch@cbn.com or reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next time. Until then, God bless you.